Today, we're diving into a really fascinating idea, a new way to look at political leaders in India. It's a kind of test, a framework that helps cut through all the noise and really analyze who is ready for the top job and why.
You know the feeling, right? You're talking politics, maybe with friends or family, and as soon as someone brings up a leader's name, boom, the conversation just hits a wall. Supporters get defensive, opponents attack, and any real discussion just dies. It becomes all about loyalty and opposition, not analysis.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at exactly why those arguments go nowhere. Then, we'll introduce this new kind of test for leaders and get into the 5 key things it measures. We'll also unpack something called the fatal flaw rule and finish up with this really powerful concept, that it's all about fit, not just force. So the fundamental problem, as our source material lays it out, is that we start our political arguments with names. And the second a name is mentioned, our brains just switch off the analysis mode and turn on the emotion mode. The whole point of this framework is to flip that, to move from just gut feel opinions to a real, structured analysis.
It's so easy to fall into these traps. We see a leader on TV all the time and think, well, they must be viable. We see someone in a position of authority and assume they're widely accepted. But, political reality is way more complicated. History is filled with competent, popular, and even really experienced leaders who failed because they just weren't the right person for that specific moment in time.
Okay, so if the old way of arguing is broken, what's the alternative? Well, we need a neutral framework, a tool that lets us step back from our own biases, and that brings us to the main event of this explainer.
It's called the Leadership Readiness Test. And listen, this is really important. This is not a crystal ball. It's not designed to predict who's going to win the next election. Think of it more like a diagnostic tool. It measures one thing and one thing only: fit. How well does the leader's specific skill set match what the country actually needs right now? So, this means we're shifting our focus. We're not looking at the usual stuff, like poll numbers or how good someone is on TV. Instead, this test zooms in on the deep structural stuff. Can they actually govern? Are they comfortable on the world stage? And can they keep a coalition of different partners together? These are the things that really determine if someone is ready to lead.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What does this test actually look at? We're about to break down the 5 parameters that form the absolute core of this whole framework. This is how you measure if a leader can not just win power, but actually use it effectively.
There are 5 of them, and each one is crucial. So let's jump right into the first one. First up is governance competence. And at the prime ministerial level, this isn't some abstract concept. It's about raw, operational reality. Can you actually run the huge, incredibly complex machine that is the government of India?
And we're not talking about theory here. This is all about a proven track record. Has a leader shown they can handle a massive ministry? Can they deal with a complex economy? Can they actually get the bureaucracy to move? It's about whether they inspire confidence, not just in voters, but in the very institutions they need to work with. Okay, parameter number 2 takes us outside the country's borders. Because, let's face it, India's prime minister is the nation's #1 diplomat, the face of the country to the entire world. And how they handle that role has very real consequences.
This is way more than just a good photo op. It's about being genuinely comfortable in those high-stakes rooms. Can they negotiate with other world leaders? Do they project a relaxed confidence, or do they come off as defensive or rigid? It's about representing the nation with an easy grace that shows real strength. The third parameter is all about a demographic that is seriously reshaping India's future: the urban and youth vote. These voters just don't respond to the old ways of doing politics. They're playing a different game. See, this group is connected to the world. They're hyper-aware of economic opportunities, and they have very little patience for old ideological debates. They're looking for signals of competence, of merit, of a better future. It's this sort of silent resonance that's becoming a much better predictor of success than, say, a huge loud rally. Now for a factor that often gets missed because it happens behind closed doors, but it is absolutely critical, and that is acceptability. In a parliamentary democracy, a prime minister cannot govern alone. They need the backing of coalition partners, other parties, and key national institutions. And here's the fascinating part. Coalition politics often doesn't pick the loudest or even the strongest leader. A lot of the time, the system chooses the least resisted leader. Someone who seems threatening to the balance will find quiet resistance everywhere they turn. So being seen as acceptable, as someone who reassures partners, is a massive strategic asset. And that brings us to our final parameter, polarization risk. Now, we often think of polarization as a political weapon to fire up your supporters, and it can be. But it's a weapon with a serious kickback, and it comes with a huge strategic risk. You can see the trade-off right here. On the one hand, a highly polarizing leader might energize their base, but on the other hand, they automatically harden the opposition, and they shrink the number of potential allies they can work with. A leader with low polarization risk just has more options, more room to maneuver. In a complex political scene, that kind of flexibility is priceless. Okay, we have the 5 parameters, but now we need to talk about a crucial rule that explains why some very powerful, very well-known leaders seem to hit a glass ceiling they can never quite break through. It's called the fatal flaw rule.
It basically works like a domino effect. If a leader is seen as seriously weak in 2 or more of these 5 areas, the political system itself starts to push back. So a leader might be super charismatic, but if they are seen as lacking in both, say, governance competence and coalition acceptability, potential partners just start to see them as a risk. It's not personal, it's the system's own defense mechanism kicking in against instability.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most important idea of this whole test. It's not about finding the loudest, the strongest, or the most forceful personality. It's about finding the leader who is the right fit for the challenges of that specific moment. And I think this quote from the source material just says it all perfectly. Leadership isn't some one-size-fits-all competition. It's all about context. The skills needed during a national crisis are totally different from the skills needed during a period of economic growth. Ultimately, the system rewards the leader who gets what the country needs, right here, right now. So we'll leave you with this question. Now that you have this 5-part toolkit, governance competence, global comfort, youth resonance, acceptability, and polarization risk, take another look at the political landscape. Think about the leaders you see in the news. How does applying this framework change the way you see them? It's a really powerful way to think beyond the daily headlines.